Wind came down off the mountains in October like it carried a personal grudge. On the porch, a woman stood still, the coffee in her hands long gone cold. She stood there most evenings now, watching the dark come down off the ridgeline like she could hold it back just by watching long enough. Then she heard it, hooves. More than one, moving fast, too fast for anyone paying a call. Too fast for neighbors, and neighbors didn't come knocking on a widow's door after dark in October without a very good reason. Her hand found the rifle, propped against the doorframe before her mind had caught up to what her body already knew. Beyond the pale reach of the lantern, dark, moving dark, one horse broke out of it, big, spent, giving everything it had left because its rider was asking for everything, and pressed against the man's back, both arms locked around his coat. Something small was holding on. Holding on like letting go meant losing everything. The man's hands came up, slow, one at a time. "I left my rifle on the horse," he said. "You can check." She did not lower the gun. Behind him, half a mile back, maybe less, the wind came off the mountains like it had a personal grudge. Not the soft kind of wind. Not the kind that moves through grass and makes you think of summer. This was October wind, Montana wind, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and stays there, the kind that says, "I have been here longer than you, and I will be here long after, so you might as well make your peace with that right now." Della Marsh stood on the porch with her coffee going cold. She did that most evenings now. Stood there and watched the dark come down off the ridgeline like it was something she could hold back just by watching it. Like if she paid enough attention to the moment the sun disappeared, she could slow it down somehow. She couldn't. She knew that. But she stood there anyway. Because some habits formed in grief were harder to break than others. And this one, this standing and watching the dark come, had started in the first weeks after Warren and had never quite stopped. 7 months since Warren. 7 months of mornings where she reached for the coffee pot and made 2 cups before she remembered. 7 months of going to bed in the middle of a bed that used to have a center. 7 months of sitting down to supper and having to remind herself every single time to set only one place, and of sometimes setting 2 anyway and then standing there looking at the second plate like it was an argument she hadn't finished yet. 7 months of being a widow on a working ranch in Montana territory, which, practically speaking, meant 7 months of being something that everyone in 3 counties was apparently very interested in the fate of. The ranch was still here. That was something. 280 head of cattle in the lower pastures. She'd sold 40 head in August to cover the east fence line repair. And she wasn't entirely sure she'd gotten the right price, because Warren had always handled the cattle negotiations. And she'd watched and learned, but watching and doing turned out to be different things. 16 horses, 412 acres running the creek bed up to the base of the ridge where the timber started. And the map got uncertain. She'd kept it, all of it. Through the hottest summer in 6 years, when the water table dropped and she'd had to move the cattle, twice looking for decent grazing, and the South Creek ran so low the horses were reluctant to drink from it. Through the first fall cattle drive she'd managed alone, with 2 hired hands she'd paid by the week, and a level of constant, vigilant anxiety she'd never quite let herself acknowledge out loud. Through the fences that kept going down on the north side, no matter how many times she fixed them. The pump that needed new seals. The roof section on the smaller outbuilding that had been on the list since spring. The quarterly accounts, she'd kept it anyway. People in Garrison Creek, that was the nearest town, 6 miles east, along the Valley Road, where it ran between the 2 ridges. People there had opinions about that. She heard them when she came in for supplies. Not said directly to her face. Nobody in Garrison Creek would say something directly to a widow's face. They had more social grace than that, and anyway they were mostly kind. But she heard it in the spaces around what they said. in the careful half-sentences, in the glances between the men at the feed store when she came in to price lumber, in the way conversation adjusted itself when she walked into a room, got quieter and more careful, got the particular quality of people being considerate. Poor woman. All alone up there, can't last the winter. Heard Drummond made an offer. Heard she refused. Stubborn is what she is. Sweet but stubborn. Della wrapped both hands around her cold coffee cup. She was 38 years old. She had buried her husband in ground she owned, and she had gone back inside and made supper, and she had been making supper every night since. The cattle were where they were supposed to be. The fences were mostly holding. The accounts balanced more or less, if you were generous with what you counted as balanced. She was not poor. She was not all alone. She had nobody the cat, who disdained most human beings on principle but had made an exception for her. And 11 chickens with strong opinions, and a rooster she hadn't named yet because naming him felt like making a commitment she wasn't prepared for. She was mostly not sure what she was. But she was still here, and the ranch was still here. And that was the conversation she was having with herself every single evening on this porch. The conversation that didn't have an ending yet. The conversation that went, I am still here, and the land is still here, and tomorrow I will still be here, and I don't know what that means yet. But I am going to keep doing it until I figure it out. She was about to go inside when she heard it. Hooves. Multiple. Moving fast. Too fast for anyone coming to pay a social call. Too fast for neighbors, who in any case didn't come calling after dark in October without a very good reason. Her hand found the Winchester propped against the doorframe before her mind had fully caught up with what her body already knew. The way it happens when you have been living carefully for a while. Your body develops its own intelligence about what certain sounds mean. She turned to face the tree line where the lane came in from the main road. The porch lantern threw a pale circle that didn't reach very far. Beyond it, dark, moving dark. He came out of the dark at a pace that said the dark behind him was worse than the dark ahead. One horse. Big roan with a deep chest and the particular leanness of an animal that had been working hard for weeks and eating what it could find. Moving hard and starting to flag. She could see it in the way the horse's head moved. The labor in it, the animal giving everything it had, because its rider was asking for everything. As he cleared the tree line and came into the pale reach of her porch lantern, Della could see there were two of them. A man, large in the way of men shaped by physical work in high country, not the bulk of someone who lifted weights for the sake of it, but the dense, weathered solidity of someone whose body had been formed by years of doing difficult things in difficult conditions. Dark beard gone longer than intention, shot through at the temples with early gray. A heavy coat, the kind with oilskin over wool that you wore when you expected the weather to have opinions. And behind him, pressed against his back, both arms locked around his middle, a child, small. Her face was buried in the back of his coat. She was holding on with the totality of grip a child uses when they have determined that they will not let go, no matter what, and that is the complete extent of their available plan. He saw her. He saw the rifle. He didn't stop. But he slowed. Hands coming up one at a time from the reins. The careful, deliberate way of a man who has done this before, who understands the mathematics of a woman with a weapon and a reason to use it, who knows that what you need to communicate in that moment is that you are not making any decisions faster than she can track them. He tracked them. He pulled up at the gate just outside the lantern light. In that zone of shadow where she could see the shape of him, but not the details. I left my rifle on the horse, he said. You can check. His voice was low, unhurried. The voice of a man who had made a decision to be calm and was executing that decision precisely, the way you'd execute any other task that needed doing right. I can see your hands, Della said. Then you see I'm telling the truth. She kept the rifle where it was. She looked at him properly. He was large in the way she'd first observed. Weather-carved, altitude-worn, dark beard, heavy coat, and those hands. Still up, steady as fence posts, which she knew something about. The hands of a man who worked with them and trusted them. Behind him, the child still hadn't moved. Still pressed into his back, still holding on the child. Della said, "My daughter, how old?" 8. Della looked at the hands, looked at the child, looked back at the hands. "What's behind you?" It wasn't a question. She said it the way you say things when you already know the shape of the answer and need the specifics confirmed. He didn't pretend it was a question. 3 men. Half-mile back, maybe less. I've been losing ground for 2 hours. Why? That's a long answer. Give me the short one. A pause. Brief. The pause of a man selecting carefully from several true things, choosing the one that was both accurate and sufficient. I know something someone doesn't want known. Della stood very still. The wind moved through the yard, sent the gate swinging slightly on its hinge, a hinge she'd been meaning to fix for 6 weeks. Warren would have noticed it on a Monday and fixed it by Tuesday morning. She'd found 100 things like that. Things simply got done when Warren was alive, because he was the kind of man who noticed what needed doing and did it, without ceremony, without announcement. Things that now appeared on a list she was constantly adding to, and never quite getting to the bottom of. She looked at the child. The child who was holding on, like holding on, was the only thing between her and something she'd rather not think about. She made a decision, not because she trusted him. She didn't know this man from a stone in the creek. She had no basis for trust, no reference point, no information beyond what he'd told her in 3 short exchanges. But the child behind him was small, and the arms were locked tight, and whatever was coming up that lane in the dark was coming regardless of what she decided. And there were decisions you made from evidence, and decisions you made from something else, something that was harder to name and easier to defend. And she was making this one from something else. "Barn," she said. "Around the side, black door. Get the horse inside and stay quiet." He was already moving before she finished the sentence. The 3 riders came through her gate 4 minutes later. She was standing on the porch, coffee in hand, like she'd been there all evening, like she hadn't just hidden 2 strangers in her barn, and was now standing in front of that barn with nothing between her and whatever came next except a composure she was building in real time. Brick by brick, the way you build anything under pressure, with imperfect materials and the determination not to let it show. The men pulled up. They were not remarkable looking, which was in its own way remarkable. Men who do bad work for hire often aren't. The one in front was broad across the shoulders, with a face that had taken several notable impacts over the years and rearranged itself around them. He had the eyes of someone who made his living reading situations quickly, who was in charge, who was afraid, who was lying, what the evenings were. Evening. Seen a rider come through? Big man. Dark horse. Della took a sip of cold coffee, looked out at the darkness past the fence, in the direction that was not the barn. "Saw someone moving fastest along the ridge road about 20 minutes ago," she said. Heading south toward the canyon crossing. The man watched her face. She let him watch it. She was not performing calm. She was not acting the part of a woman with nothing to hide. She was simply a woman standing on her own porch, at the end of her working day, who had answered a question, and who was waiting for the conversation to reach its conclusion, so she could go inside where it was warm. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure I'm standing on my own porch on my own property," she said, "which is usually where I'm most sure about things." Another beat. His eyes moved to the barn. She had left the lantern in there. She knew she'd left it, and she'd made her peace with that in the 30 seconds before these men arrived. She'd thought Warren always left a lantern in the barn at night because of the horses. He said horses slept better with a little light. That lantern has been in that barn every night for 11 years. She held the look, not aggressive, not nervous. Just a woman on a porch who had answered a question and was waiting for the conversation to end. He touched his hat. Sorry to bother you, ma'am. They rode south. She watched them until she couldn't hear the hooves anymore. Then she stood there another 5 minutes, in the cold, with her cold coffee, with the wind finding the gap between her collar and her neck, the way it always did, just to be certain. Then she put the coffee down and took the rifle and went to the barn. He was in the far stall with the horse, standing between the lantern and the door, positioned deliberately so his body was between the light source and any gap that might let it show from outside. The roan was calm, calmer than it had any right to be after that run, which said something about the man. You didn't get a horse to stand quiet in a strange barn after a hard run without a particular quality of communication between horse and rider, without the horse understanding that this person was someone whose calm could be trusted. The child was on a hay bale, with her back against the wall. She had red-brown hair, the color of creek water over sandstone, that particular warm rust that catches the light differently than brown or red alone. It was coming out of its braid in approximately 12 directions, the braid having clearly been done some time ago and not redone since, which told a story about the day they'd had. She had her father's eyes, gray and steady and older than the rest of her face deserved, the eyes of someone who has been paying close attention to serious things for longer than should have been required of her. In her arms, a cloth doll, worn to softness in the particular way of things that have been loved a very long time. The color of it faded from whatever it had been, originally to something quieter, less definable, the color of something that has passed through many hands and many nights and many miles and has absorbed all of that into itself. The kind of worn that comes from being held. From being the thing you hold when you need to hold something. The girl was watching Della with those two steady eyes, watching her with the calm, comprehensive attention of someone who has learned to assess situations quickly and has been doing so for longer than most 8-year-olds would need to. They're gone, Della said. The man said nothing, just looked at her with those flat gray eyes and waited. The look of someone who had learned to let information arrive before responding to it. The look of someone for whom patience was not a virtue but a practice. Deliberately cultivated south toward the canyon is what I told them. Thank you, don't thank me yet. Della set the lantern on the shelf where she always put it. The third shelf from the bottom, left side, because that was where Warren had put it and she'd never had any reason to change it. Habit was a kind of memory. You have until morning. After that I need an explanation. That's fair. And you sleep in the barn. Not the house, understood. She looked at the child. The child looked back. What's your name? Della said. The girl didn't answer. Not rudely. Not defiantly. Simply. Didn't. As if the question had arrived in a language she was still deciding whether to engage with. Della looked at the man. Ren, he said. Then, quietly, in the particular voice of someone handling something fragile. She hasn't talked much. Since her mother, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The shape of it was enough. Della looked at Ren again. The girl was still watching her, still holding the doll. There was no hostility in it, and no pleading, just looking. The calm, careful look of someone who is deciding something important and is giving the decision the time it deserves. Are you hungry? Della said. Ren looked at her father, a quick sideways look, checking, getting permission or maybe just information. He nodded once, small, definite. She turned back to Della and dipped her chin in the same way, small, definite. Come to the house, Della said. Both of you, you can eat. Then he goes back to the barn and you can have the storage room off the kitchen. There's a cot. She left the lantern where it was and walked back to the house. Behind her, she heard the sound of a child's feet in the hay. She made biscuits because she had dough already rested, and stew because there was always stew on the back of the stove. In October. October, in Montana, was the month when you kept something hot going, because the cold came in through the walls at night, and stew was one of the answers to that. She set 3 places without examining why she did it. She would think about that later, the automatic, unconsidered 3, and understand it as one of those small, truthful things the body knows before the mind does. The man sat at the table with the careful manners of someone who had been taught them, young, and had remembered them, despite the last several hours. He ate with the particular appreciation of someone who had been eating trail food for longer than was comfortable. Not wolfing it, not performing gratitude. Simply eating with the full attention of a person for whom a proper meal had become something that required noticing. He watched the room, not in a threatening way. In the way of someone who was always tracking, always noting the layout of things, the exits, the details that would matter if you needed them to. Wren ate steadily and seriously. She had placed the doll on the empty chair beside her. Not propped it there, not set it aside. Placed it with intention, as if the chair had been the doll's chair all along. And it was simply returning to its rightful position. Nobody talked. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was more like 3 people taking stock, looking at each other across a table and deciding what kind of conversation was actually necessary before they started having it. What could be said? What could wait? Finally, Della said, "Your name, Holt?" He set down his spoon. "Holt Granger." She waited. "I worked for Pinkerton. 7 years. Investigation work. Before that, I was in the mountains. Scouting, mostly tracking, finding things, understanding terrain." He paused. "After my wife, I went back to the mountains. That was 2 years ago. We've been up there since. What brought you down?" He looked at his daughter. The look lasted only a moment, but it contained several things. The uncomplicated love of a parent for a child, the complicated guilt of a parent who knows they've been asking too much of one, and something else, something harder to name. Something like, "I have been looking at this question from the mountains for 2 years, and I don't have a better answer than what I'm looking at right now." She needed something the mountains couldn't give her, he said. A pause. "And I got pulled into something I didn't go looking for. The men, tonight. They work for someone who doesn't want a witness to certain things. I came across information I wasn't supposed to come across. I didn't have anywhere to take it yet." Della looked at him. He had honest eyes. She'd learned to read eyes. Warren had taught her that without meaning to, in the way that living with someone for 11 years teaches you things that were never named as lessons. Warren would say, "Watch the eyes, not the mouth. The mouth can be managed. The eyes are always doing something true even when they're trying not to." Holt Granger had eyes that were tart and careful, and not hiding what they were feeling. Only controlling when it showed. Not the same as dishonest. The opposite of dishonest, actually. It was the honesty that was being controlled, not concealed. "You can stay until the snow settles," she said. "I need the north fence reinforced before winter. The water trough by the lower pasture has a split board I haven't had time to address. The gate post on the east side needs resetting. There's enough work for a week, maybe more. I'll earn it. I know you will. Because if you don't, the barn door faces east, and I'm up before sunrise." She picked up the bowls and stood. "I don't need your whole history, Mr. Granger. But I do need to know if those men are coming back." He was quiet for a moment, probably. "Then I need to know that when they do, you handle it away from my cattle and my property line." "Yes, ma'am." "Della." He looked at her. She met the look steadily. "If you're going to be on this land," she said, "Della." She showed Wren to the storage room. It was small, built originally as a pantry before they'd added the proper larder onto the back of the house. But it had a window that faced east and got the morning light, and she'd put a wool blanket on the cot and an extra quilt at the foot. and the room smelled like dried apples from the bushels she'd stored in September. Wren stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then she looked at Della, and then, without prompting, without being asked, without any preamble whatsoever, she held out the doll. Della looked at it. "You want me to hold her?" Wren gave the smallest nod imaginable. So small it was almost more of a decision than a movement. The nod of someone who has decided something and is enacting that decision with the minimum possible ceremony. Della took the doll. Carefully, the way you take something that belongs to someone else when they've trusted you with it, with the full understanding that it is borrowed, that it is precious, that the temporary responsibility for it should not be taken lightly. The doll was heavier than she expected. Solid. Something inside it, stuffing that had compacted over years of being held, or perhaps something else. "Birdie," Wren said. Her voice was low, rough with disuse, like a door that has been closed too long and needs oiling before it moves the way it should. But it was there, unmistakably, distinctly there. One word, the doll's name. Offered like a gift or an introduction or maybe both. Della held the doll for a moment, the weight of it in her hands. "Birdie," Della said. "Good name." Wren took the doll back and held her the way she'd held her before, against her chest, both arms around it. In the position of someone who has been carrying something important for a long time, for a very long time, and has become very good at it. She went to the cot and sat down. Della pulled the door most of the way closed. Left an inch of light from the hallway, because you never knew what a child needed in an unfamiliar dark. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment, 3 bowls in the basin. A lantern lit on the table that usually only lit one place setting. The sound, small but real and unmistakable, of a child settling into sleep somewhere in her house. The creak of the cot. The particular quiet of a small body, finding the position it would hold until morning. She had not planned for this. She had planned for a great many things in the past 7 months. The cattle count, the winter feed, the fence line, the grief that came in waves, and the grief that sat at the bottom of everything like ballast. She had not planned for a child in the storage room and a strange man in the barn, and the feeling, specific and strange, that the house had exhaled. She went to the window and looked out at the barn. A thin edge of light at the bottom of the black door. He was still awake. She understood that. She wouldn't sleep either, if she were him. She turned down the kitchen lantern and went to bed. She lay there listening to the sounds of her house. And for the first time in 7 months, the sounds were not entirely her own. Morning came the way Montana come in October, sudden, clear, cold enough to mean it. The kind of cold that doesn't apologize for itself. Della was at the stove when she heard the barn door. She looked out the kitchen window and watched Holt Granger cross the yard in the early gray light. He had his coat on and his hat pulled down, and he moved with the efficiency of a man who had been waking up in cold places for a long time and had stopped noticing the cold as something worth commenting on. He disappeared around the side of the house toward the well. He came back 2 minutes later. He'd washed his face. His beard was wet at the edges. He knocked. She opened the door. He had, in his left hand, 3 pieces of split wood from the pile beside the barn. "Your kitchen box was low," he said. She stepped back to let him in. He put the wood in the box by the stove, straightened, looked at the kitchen without making it obvious. He was looking. Absorbing it, the way a person absorbs information about an unfamiliar place when they know they're going to be working in it. "I walked the near property line before first light," he said. "The corner post on the north fence has heaved. One good storm and that whole section comes down." Della poured coffee. "Put it on the table, I know," she said. "The gate post on the east side needs resetting. Ground's been moving under it, I know. The board on the water trough. I know." She sat down across from him. "I have a list. I've had the list since August. What I haven't had is enough hours in the day." He picked up the coffee. nodded. The nod of someone who understood that particular arithmetic, the one where the necessary work exceeds the available time, without needing it explained. "Tell me what's most urgent," he said. "Fence." "Before anything, huh?" "I'll start after breakfast." Wren appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair approximately worse than the night before, which had seemed at the time like the worst it could possibly be. Birdie under one arm. She looked at the table, looked at her father, looked at Della with those gray eyes that were already fully awake and taking inventory. "Sit down," Della said. Wren sat down. Della put a plate in front of her. Biscuits from last night, warmed, a bowl of oat porridge, a cup of warm milk from that morning's milking. Wren looked at the milk, then at Della, then very quietly, with that rough, low voice that seemed to come from somewhere that hadn't been used in a while and was finding its way back. "Thank you." 2 words this time. Holt didn't react. He kept his eyes on his coffee. The effort of that, of keeping his face still at the sound of his daughter's voice, saying 2 words she hadn't said in months, was visible only in the small tightening around his jaw, the brief compression of something large into something manageable. Della turned back to the stove. She had the feeling, specific and clear, that the right response to this moment was no response at all, that the right thing to do was let it exist without framing it. He worked like a man trying to outrun something, not frantic, not sloppy. The opposite, actually. He worked with the kind of absolute focus that comes from needing something to put your mind against. Something solid and present and demanding. Something that gave back what you put in, that didn't move, unless you moved it, and didn't hold unless you made it hold. The fence post took 4 hours, digging and setting, and tamping and checking. She came out at noon with cold beef and bread, and found him doing it a 3rd time. Checking the set for the 3rd time, because the first 2 times hadn't satisfied him. "It's straight," she said. "It'll be straight all winter," he said. "Not just for now." There was a difference. She understood that. She left the food on the fence rail and went back to the cattle. When she came back at 3, the gate post was reset. The water trough board was replaced with new timber he'd found in the barn. He was working on a section of fence she hadn't even put on the list. She stopped. "That section wasn't urgent," she said. He didn't stop working. "It will be." She looked at the fence line. He was right. She'd been watching that section weaken since July. Watching the posts shift incrementally in the wet ground after the summer rains. Putting it on the list and moving it down because there was always something more urgent. He'd seen it in one morning. She went back to the house without saying anything else. Wren spent that first day following Della at a distance of approximately 4 feet, not speaking, not asking, just present, the way a cat is present in a room. Occupying the same space, moving when you moved, settling when you settled, maintaining that particular interval that communicated very clearly. "I am here, but I am not making demands about what that means. I am here, and I am watching, and I am deciding." Della let her. She showed her where the hens were without making it a lesson. She handed her the corn to scatter without explaining what it was for. She let the girl figure it out. Which she did, in about 45 seconds, with the systematic efficiency of a child who has learned to observe before acting, who understands that watching how something works is more useful than being told. Wren scattered the corn with small, careful throws. Not random. A specific pattern, even coverage. The kind of thoroughness that comes from someone who takes small tasks seriously because they have understood that small tasks are how large things work. Della watched without showing she was watching. This child had been taught. Not by a school, though maybe by that too, but by someone who cared how things were done. By someone who believed that the way you did small things mattered. That attention was not optional. By her mother, Della understood. The woman who was 2 years gone and present in every movement this girl made. At midday, They sat on the back steps together while Wren ate her lunch. The doll was propped against the step beside her, face outward, as if standing watch. The cat, an orange barn cat Warren had named Nobody, before Della could intervene, on the reasoning that nobody would want to give a cat a name like that on purpose, which meant the cat would never be claimed by anyone, and would therefore stay. Cat sat on steps below them. Wren looked at the cat. The cat looked at Wren. There was a silence between them that was more like an assessment than a pause. Wren slowly extended her free hand. Nobody, typically skittish, typically uninterested in any human affection, the kind of cat who tolerated rather than welcomed, who would accept a scratch behind the ears with the air of someone doing you a favor, walked forward and put her head against Wren's palm. Wren's face did something, not a smile exactly, something quieter and deeper than a smile, a softening, something that had been held very tight for a very long time, letting go of just the smallest fraction of its tension. The way a rope lets go when the pressure is eased. Not all at once, nothing dramatic, just the faintest relaxation of something that has been taught. For so long it had forgotten there was another way to be. Della looked out at the pasture, gave the moment room to be itself. This was the thing about grief. Not just her own grief, which she knew well enough by now, but grief in general. It needed room. It did not do well when crowded or managed or explained. It needed to be given space to exist in its own shape. Without anyone trying to change that shape, she understood this. She was not sure how she understood it. Perhaps from the months of people trying to help by filling the space her grief occupied. And from noticing that this never helped, that what helped was the rare person who simply sat beside the space without trying to fill it. She looked out at the pasture and gave the moment room. That evening, Della found the notice. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been going through the mail she'd picked up in town 3 days ago and hadn't dealt with yet. She kept letting it stack up, which was something she'd never done when Warren was alive. Another small erosion she'd been watching in herself and not quite knowing how to stop. And there it was, between a seed catalog and a notice about water rights. A Pinkerton circular. She knew what Pinkerton was. Most people in Montana Territory knew what Pinkerton was by 1867. The detective agency that handled things the young territory's barely existent formal law couldn't or wouldn't. The agency that crossed jurisdictions and found people who didn't want to be found, and documented things that needed documenting. She read it, then she read it again. Holt Granger, former Pinkerton operative. Wanted for questioning in connection with the death of James Aldous Crenshaw, Colorado Territory, March 1865. Considered armed, approach with caution. Reward offered for information leading to apprehension. She sat with it for a long time. The fire popped. Nobody the cat appeared from wherever she'd been spending the evening and arranged herself on the hearth, with the precision of an animal who considers her preferences to be the primary organizational principle of any room she occupies. Della thought about his hands, still and steady in the lantern light, coming up one at a time from the reins in the dark, deliberate, the hands of a man who knew how to communicate clearly through the position of his body. She thought about the fence post. Said a third time because twice wasn't good enough. She thought about Wren, the careful way she held the doll, the way she'd said thank you into her porridge bowl that morning, like the words, cost her something she'd been carefully saving for the right occasion. She got up. She went to the stove. She held the notice over the flame until it caught. Then she held it over the basin until it was ash. Then she ran water over the ash until nothing remained. She was not. She told herself, standing at the basin, with the water running cold over her hands, making a judgment about whether he was innocent. She didn't have enough information for that, and she knew it. She was making a judgment about whether a man who set fence posts until they were right, and not just until they do, whose daughter said, Thank you for warm milk," in a voice rough with disuse, deserved to have her hand him over to three men who'd been chasing him through the mountains in the dark. Those were two different judgments. She could hold both at once. She went back to the table and finished sorting the mail. On the third evening, she saw Rin at the grave. She hadn't been watching for it. She was at the kitchen window rinsing the supper dishes, looking out at the yard in the way you look at something familiar. Without really seeing it, when she registered the small shape of the girl standing in the fading light at the far edge of the yard where the two graves were, Warren's. And beside his, the older one, Warren's mother, who had died before Della arrived on this land, and whom Della knew only from a daguerreotype on the mantel and the stories Warren told in a certain mood. Quiet stories. Told in the voice of someone who misses a person who taught them something essential. Rin was standing in front of Warren's stone. She had Bertie held against her chest with one arm. The other arm was at her side. She was talking. Della could not hear the words. The window was closed against the October cold, and the distance was too far. But she could see the movement of it, the small lift and fall of the girl's shoulders, the way her head tilted slightly at intervals, as if listening, the pauses between one thing said and the next, talking to the dead. Della knew that. She'd done it herself. Still did, some mornings, standing at Warren's stone before the day got its full momentum. Told him about the cattle, about the fence, about the things she couldn't say to anyone living because there was no one living who would understand the specific shape of the things she needed to say. Because the person who would have understood those specific things was the person she was talking to. She watched Ren until the light got too low. Then she turned back to the dishes. She was not going to tell Holt. This was not hers to tell. But she stood at the window a long time after Ren had come inside. She stood there thinking about what it meant that a child who wouldn't speak to the living had found someone to speak to at the edge of a stranger's yard. About what it said about grief, that it sometimes needed to go somewhere, and when the ordinary places were unavailable or insufficient, it found somewhere else. About all the things that don't require explanation, that simply are. Holt came in from the barn on the fourth morning earlier than usual, before first light. His face had a look she hadn't seen on it before, not alarmed, but sharpened. The look of a man who has noticed something and is in the process of deciding what to do with the noticing. He sat down, accepted coffee. They came back, last night. The three men. I saw them from the barn, on the property, east fence line, just watching. They didn't come in. He wrapped both hands around the cup. They know I'm here. They lost the trail last week, but they've been working back toward it. Who sent them? Della said he was quiet for a moment. Holt, he looked at her. I'll handle it. That's not what I asked. Another pause. The kind of pause that isn't reluctance exactly. More like the careful selection of how much truth to give at once, in what order, to be most useful rather than most complete. A man named Silas Drummond. He said. She felt something shift, not surprise. More like the arrival of something she'd been half expecting, without knowing she was waiting for it. The particular feeling of a piece settling into a puzzle you hadn't fully understood you were working on. I know that name, she said. I thought you might. He owns the 3 spreads to the north. She stopped. He was a friend of my husband's. Years ago. Before they had a falling out, Holt looked at her steadily. What did they fall out over? Warren never told me exactly. Just said they disagreed about how the valley should develop. That Drummond had ideas Warren didn't share. She paused. Did Warren ever mention water rights to you? There are things I've been looking into, Holt said carefully. Things I'd rather have confirmed before I say them, then confirm them. Her voice was level, not angry. Precise. And say them. Give me 2 more days, he said. She looked back at him steadily. 2 days, she said. That afternoon, Silas Drummond came to call. He came alone, which was the first thing that made it strange. Silver-haired, well-dressed, not extravagant considered. A face that had been handsome once and had become distinguished in the way of men who know how to age in public. He held his hat in both hands. He said he'd heard she'd taken on help. He said he respected Warren and wanted to see the place continue. He had very clear blue eyes that looked kind until you paid attention long enough to see that they were doing something else, measuring, calculating. He left without coming inside. She went immediately to find Holt. "The spring," Holt said, when she'd told him. He looked at her steadily. "I found the survey maps in your husband's desk," Warren had marked them. "There's a substantial underground water source running under the east pasture, large enough to feed the whole valley through a drought year." Della was very still. Warren never told me. Maybe he was still deciding what to do about it. Holt paused. "Or maybe he was protecting you from knowing." The wind moved through the yard. The gate swung on its loose hinge. "He fell off his horse," Della said. "At Miller Creek." "That's what they said." "Yes." His horse had crossed Miller Creek 100 times. "Yes." They stood there, the thing she had never let herself fully think settled between them, like something solid. Like a stone set down at last. "2 days," she said. "Yes. Find me something I can use." That night she didn't sleep. She lay in the middle of the bed and thought about Warren. The last morning. He'd been up earlier than usual. She'd heard him in the study before dawn, the sound of drawers opening, the scratch of a pen. She'd rolled over and gone back to sleep. She'd never asked him what he was writing. At 3 in the morning she got up and went to the study. She sat at Warren's desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the one she hadn't opened since August. There was something at the back of it, small, folded carefully. Warren's handwriting, the careful, squared-up script he used when he wanted to be precise. "If something happens to me, the east pasture spring. Drummond knows. He has already made his intentions clear. I refused him. SD does not accept refusal. Take this to someone you trust who is not in Garrett County." And below that, a single name. Not Drummond's. The name of the man Drummond had sent to make his intentions clear. Della sat at her husband's desk in the dark for a long time. Then she folded the paper back up, put it in the pocket of her robe, went back to bed. In the morning, she was going to hand a dead man's note to a former Pinkerton detective who was sleeping in her barn. In the morning, things were going to be different. They already were. They had been since the night a big man came out of the dark with his hands up and a child pressed against his back. The morning broke clean and cold. When Holt came in and saw them, his daughter leaning against Della's side at the stove, Della's hand resting on the girl's unruly hair, his face did something she'd never seen it do. It stopped working so hard, just for a moment. A small giving way at the corners of the eyes and the set of the jaw. Then he picked up his coffee and sat down. She put Warren's note on the table. He read it, read it again. Looked at the name at the bottom. "You know that name," she said. "I know that name," he said. He said nothing else for a moment, his coffee cup in both hands. Then he looked up at her. "We're going to need more than this," he said. "But this is a beginning, then begin," she said. On the 6th day, Holt found the saddle. He'd been going through the tack room, methodical. Everything in rows on the floor so he could see it all. When he found it pushed to the back of the lowest shelf, under a folded piece of canvas, Warren's good saddle. The one Della said he'd been using when he fell. Holt crouched down, turned it over. He looked at it for a long time, the cinch strap. Not broken, not worn through, not the natural failure of leather used too long, cut, most of it, not all. Enough left that it would hold for a mile. Maybe 2. Long enough to get a man past the property line. Long enough to get a man to Miller Creek. He put it back exactly where he'd found it, covered it with the canvas. Went back to work on the fence, and thought. He thought the way he used to think on a case. Not frantically, the opposite. Slow, patient, letting pieces move around each other until they found their places. Drummond wanted the land. Warren said no. Drummond sent someone. The name on Warren's note, Cutter. He'd heard that name before. It came to him at 4 in the morning, lying awake in the barn listening to the horses breathe. Colorado. March of 1865. A counterfeiting operation out of Denver. A man they couldn't pin down. Someone who moved between territories, doing work that needed doing quietly. A working name, Cutter. Because of how he handled situations. The same man who had come to his house in Colorado had come to this ranch in Montana and done a job for Silas Drummond. And now that man was somewhere in this valley, which meant the 3 men chasing Holt weren't just about what he knew from the mountains. They were about Warren Marsh. Holt sat in the dark of the barn, he thought. He breathed. Then he got up, made sure his rifle was loaded, and went to watch the property line until dawn. He rode into Garrison Creek. The telegraph office was between the saloon and the land registry. He sent 2 messages, one to Nate Grier at Pinkerton in Denver, one to a federal land agent about the requirements around water rights surveys. Then he went to the saloon and nursed 1 drink and listened to 2 men at a corner table who thought they were being more careful than they were. He caught 3 things. Drummond was expecting someone from Colorado within the week. Talk about the widow's spread. The word spring used twice. The word soon used once. He rode back. The letter from Nate Grier came on a Tuesday. Inside, dry goods packaging. Dorothy at the general store had agreed to be the conduit. A woman of 60 who had opinions about Silas Drummond that she'd been keeping to herself for 3 years and was ready to stop keeping. He read it at the kitchen table after Wren had gone to bed. Cutter's real name is Dale Voss, Holt said. Della sat across from him, watching his face. 8 years working across 4 territories. And he is in this valley. He came up from Colorado 3 weeks ago. And the fire, she said. Voss. Yes, he killed Warren. Drummond ordered it. Voss did it. How do we get him? We need to get Voss to show himself on our terms. Nate's sending a federal land agent to register the spring survey. When Drummond realizes the water rights are being formally claimed through legal channels, he'll move. He'll send Voss. Here, Della looked at him. You're using the ranch as bait, she said. I'm using it as a conclusion. There's a difference. Explain the difference. Bait is something you set and walk away from. A conclusion is something you stand in front of. She looked at him for a long time, and you'll stand in front of it. Yes. With me, she said. He held her gaze. A long moment with you, he said. The days that followed were 2 things at once. Ordinary and charged. The cattle needed moving, and the fence needed watching, and Wren needed breakfast. Signals and watches and the careful unspoken language of 2 people, building a defense together without quite naming it as such. One evening she came out of the house to find Holt and Wren at the side of the barn. Wren was on a fence rail, and Holt was standing below her, and they were talking, actually talking, back and forth. She could hear the rhythm of it from a distance. She stopped, didn't go closer. She watched Holt's shoulders, the way they were, for once, not holding everything up. And Wren, talking with her hands a little, which Della hadn't seen before. She turned and went back inside. Stood at the kitchen basin, with both hands flat on the edge of it. She was doing something she hadn't done in 7 months. She was not thinking about the next thing that needed doing. She was standing in the present tense, just there, with a man and a child outside her barn. The smell of supper on the stove, just this. She hadn't known how much she'd missed the present tense until she was standing in it. She told him about Warren that night, not the facts. She'd given him those. She told him the other things. How Warren had proposed in a general store in Ohio, while she was choosing between bolts of cloth, said it so matter-of-factly. She thought he was talking about the cloth, and she'd said yes, and bought the wrong bolt and had a curtain the wrong color for 3 years, before she could laugh about it. How he'd built this house with strangers who showed up, because that was what you did in those days, and had thanked each of them by name every evening, and remembered those names for years. How he'd cried once, out where he thought she couldn't see, when a calf didn't make it through its first night. Heck, how she'd pretended not to see, because she loved him too much to embarrass him over something that tender. Holt listened. Completely. Not waiting for his turn. I was better at showing than saying, he said. Adeline told me she could always tell what I was feeling by my hands. Loose meant happy. Too still meant worried. He looked at his hands on the table. I asked why she never told me before. She said because she liked having information I didn't know she had. Della smiled, actually smiled. The real one. I would have liked her, she said. She would have liked you. She respected people who didn't fold. He was quiet a moment. Even at the end, she didn't fold. She protected Wren. That was the last thing she did. Your wife was a brave woman, Della said. She was the bravest person I've known. A pause. Until recently, she stood and took the cups to the basin. Get some sleep, she said. You won't, but try. Yes, ma'am. Della? Yes, Della. She heard him go out. She stood at the basin for a long time. It was Wren found it, or rather, it was Wren who had always known it was there, and Wren who finally decided the time had come. She came out of the storage room on a particular afternoon, with Birdie in her arms and a look on her face that was new. Not frightened, not excited, resolved. The look of someone who has been done something for a while, and has finished deciding. I need to show you something, she said. She placed Birdie on the kitchen table. She reached around to the back seam of the doll's body, hand-stitched original, but with some stitches that were newer than others, the seam having been opened and closed before, and carefully worked it open. She pulled out something small, folded, protected by the stuffing. It was a woman's handwriting. Neat, pressed into the page with urgency but with precision, every letter legible. The handwriting of someone who was writing quickly, because she did not know how much time she had, and was making every word count because of that. His name is Dale Voss. He calls himself Cutter where he works. He came to our house before Holt came home. He had a message for Holt from Drummond. I did not let him in. I told him Holt wasn't here. He looked at Wren. I know what that look means. I am writing this down because I may not have another chance to write anything down. Holt will know what to do with it, if he doesn't find it. Wren, my love, if you find this first, give it to someone you trust. Not the law. Not anyone in town. Someone you have decided is safe. You'll know who. I trust your judgment completely. I always have. Mama Della's hands were completely still on the paper. She looked up at Wren. How long have you had this? She said. Since the night Mama died. Her voice was steady. She put it inside Birdie during the day. She told me to keep Birdie safe. She said it like it was just a thing to do, and you kept it safe, the whole time. Through everything. Della folded the paper, held it. Why now? She said. Why are you showing me now? Wren looked at her with those steady gray eyes. Because Mama said, give it to someone I trust, not the law, not anyone in town. Someone I decided was safe. Della looked at her. And you decided, she said. Wren said. Holt read it twice, very still both times. Then he set it down and pressed both hands flat on either side of it. He looked up at his daughter. She was protecting you, he said. Even then, she was protecting you, Wren said. She said you'd know what to do. He closed his eyes. Opened them. Are you all right, he said. To Wren. Only to Wren. I've been all right. I've been waiting to give it to the right person. He looked at his daughter the way a father looks at a child, who has done something that breaks his heart with pride. Then he looked at Della. We have everything, he said. A witness account in her own hand. A name. The saddle, Warren's note. Tom Briggs's testimony. Nate's report, he paused. We have everything, thank you, Della said. To the paper, to the woman who'd written it. To the child who'd carried it across 2 years and 1,000 miles without letting go. Wren looked at Bertie. She says, "You're welcome," she said. The fire happened on a Thursday. She smelled it first, sharp and wrong. Not the stove, not the hearth. Something burning that shouldn't be. She was at the window and in the yard, and running, before she'd made the conscious decision to run. The small hay outbuilding, the overflow winter feed, was alight from the ground up. Someone had been thorough. This was not accident. This was instruction. Holt, he was already there, already between her and the building with his arm out. The barn's not caught yet. Get the cattle out of the near pen and push them to the lower pasture. Go, she went. The cattle were already pressing against the fence in their panic. She got the gate and pushed through them, working the outside of the herd, keeping them moving south away from the heat and the smell. Behind her she could hear Holt at the water pump, moving between pump and barn wall, with the focused relentlessness of a man who has decided what he's doing and is doing it. She took the second bucket. They worked for 2 hours. The outbuilding burned to the ground. The barn held. Afterward, they stood in the yard. Soot and sweat. Wren was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket with Bertie in her arms. She'd stayed exactly where she should. Having understood without being told what was needed, it was set, Holt said. Not angry. Past anger into something colder and more useful, I know. Whether there's something worth protecting here, he looked at the ruin. And then, after a pause, there is, she looked at him. He was looking at the ruin, but she had the feeling he wasn't entirely looking at the ruin. We rebuild, she said, better than before. Tom Briggs showed up the next morning with his sons and a wagon of lumber. He had known Warren since before Della arrived. 12 years, give or take, and had come to the burial and stood at the right distance. And that had mattered more than words. 2 more families came that afternoon. By evening, they had the frame up. By the second evening, it had walls. Holt worked alongside them, said little, did twice what anyone else did. By the end of the second day, Tom Briggs had stopped treating him like a stranger, which was Tom Briggs's particular form of acceptance. That evening, Tom stayed on the porch. He's been buying up this valley for 6 years, Tom said about Drummond. Your husband was the only one who wouldn't deal. There are 4 other families. If he takes this land, they're surrounded on 3 sides. We're building a case, Holt said. Properly. Something that holds. Tom decided something. My east fence has been cut 3 times in 2 years. My water delivery got blocked last spring. Henderson's lost 2 calves to what the deputy called wolves. He paused. There aren't wolves in this valley. I need you to write it down, Holt said. Dates and details. Everything you can remember. You're building a pattern, Tom said. Hard luck doesn't follow property lines, Holt said. Tom rode off in the dark. Della looked at the new walls of the outbuilding. Still pale, the new lumber, bright against the dark of the older structures. He came to test us, she said. He came to see if you'd break, Holt said. Or sell. And what did he see? Holt looked at the new walls. A barn that went up faster than the old one burned. The land agent arrived from the capital on a Friday. He spent 2 days on the east pasture confirming what Warren had documented. On the second evening, he filed the formal water rights claim at the land registry in Garrison Creek. It would be on Drummond's desk by morning, and on Friday evening, everything changed. Della was at the kitchen window when she saw Rook Fallon ride through the gate. Deputy. The one Holt had assessed as compromised. He looked like a man who'd made a decision that had cost him something. Drummond got the registry notice, he said at the door, and this morning he sent Voss. They're coming for the ranch. Tonight, why are you telling me this, she said. He was quiet, because I have a daughter, he said. She's 4. Some men find their line in their children. Some men need a specific reason. Something small and concrete and utterly vulnerable, to become the person they should have been earlier. Inside, Holt came in and stopped. He looked at Fallon. Fallon looked at Holt. Two men who knew things about each other that neither had spoken aloud. He came to warn us, Della said. Holt questioned him. 2 years working for Drummond. A debt from before the badge. Now a daughter he was tired of failing. Holt looked at Della. She gave him the smallest nod. He sat down. Then here's what we're going to do, he said. Wren, when Della told her she needed to stay inside, no matter what she heard, Wren listened with those steady eyes and said, okay, just okay. No argument. No questions. The word of someone who has learned to trust a particular person's judgment. She looked at Della. You'll be all right, she said. Not a question. Yes, Della said. Because you're not the kind of person who isn't. Della put her hand on the girl's head. This child who had carried a secret for 2 years in a cloth doll and known exactly when to hand it over. Stay inside, she said. No matter what you hear. Wren went to the storage room. The door clicked shut. Della picked up Warren's rifle. The one she hadn't touched since the day he'd taught her to use it, 11 years ago. In this yard, she checked the load. She went to stand with Holt. Outside, the mountains were dark. The night was very still, somewhere on the road from the north. 4 men were riding toward her land. Let them come. The night had no moon. Which was either very bad luck or very good planning. Depending on which side of it you were standing on, Holt had planned for it. He'd been watching the moon cycles for a week. Old Pinkerton habit. You learn to read what the skies gives you before you commit to anything. A moonless night in October in Montana meant cold. It meant visibility at maybe 30 feet without a lantern. It meant anyone coming across open ground had to move slow or make noise. Slow or loud, either one worked for him. He'd positioned Fallon at the east fence line. Fallon had said the word daughter with a weight Holt recognized. Men who said it like that were usually telling the truth. He'd kept one eye on the east fence anyway. Della was at the north corner of the house. She'd moved there without being told, like she'd been waiting for this specific night her whole life. Warren's rifle, across her forearms, barrel down. Patient Holt was at the barn, in the dark, just inside the door. He thought about Wren in the storage room, about Birdie on the pillow, about Adeline's handwriting on a small Posse paper that it had traveled 2 years and 1,000 miles. You'll know who. I trust your judgment completely. He thought about an 8-year-old girl deciding that Della Marsh was safe. His daughter's judgment, which had never been wrong. Not once. He breathed. He waited. They came from the north first. 2 riders moving slow along the property line, looking for the soft place, the point where the dark was deepest. The north riders were the distraction. He'd expected this. Men like Voss split your attention. He kept his eyes on the east, there, 2 shapes, moving on foot, coming in along the creek bed, where the ground was soft. He waited until they were past the fence line, past the point of retreat. Then he stepped out of the barn. He simply appeared, in the dark, between them and the house, a big shape. Motionless, the 2 men stopped. The larger one had the stance of a man for whom violence was a professional skill, who had practiced it long enough that his body had learned to be at ease with it. That one was Voss. Long way from Colorado, Holt said, Granger. The voice was flat. Didn't expect you here? I know. You've been building something. Yes, won't matter, we'll see. Voss moved fast, very fast. Left and low. Something in his hand that caught no light. Holt moved right. Not away, sideways. Moving away from a man like that put you where he wanted you. Sideways put you where he didn't expect you. They collided. Hard. The second man turned to run. Fallon stepped out from the fence shadow. Badge visible. The authority of a man who has decided who he is going to be from this moment forward. Don't, Fallon said. The smaller man stopped. Hands up. Done. Which left Holt and Voss. Voss was good. No wasted motion. No anger. Just application. The way a hammer hits a nail. Holt was better, not because he was bigger. Not because he was stronger. Because he was motivated in a way Dale Voss could not match. Because somewhere in the house behind him was an 8-year-old girl who had carried a dead woman's words through 2 years and 1,000 miles. Because far somewhere at the corner of that house was a woman who had buried her husband in ground someone else had decided to take. Because Voss had walked away from situations like this before, and Holt had decided, very clearly at some point during the last 3 weeks, that he was not doing that again. It took 4 minutes. Voss went down, not dead. Holt had chosen that. A dead man's crimes died with him. Voss was going to testify. The North Riders had turned back at the noise. Fallon confirmed it. Della came around the north corner, rifle in hand, unhurried. Like a woman who had assessed the situation and found it concluded to her satisfaction, she looked at Voss on the ground. She looked at Holt. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No, are you sure?" "I'm sure." She checked him over with her eyes. "The way you check something you've decided matters." "Come inside," she said. "Both of you. We need to talk about the next part." The marshals were already riding. Nate had put them on the road before the confirmation even arrived. He'd known, the way Nate always knew, when something was about to break. Holt sent the message anyway. Fallon rode to the telegraph. Voss and his man were secured in the barn. In the kitchen, the silence that follows the loud part settled over the table. Not empty, full. Full of everything that had just happened and everything that might still happen, and the specific exhaustion of people who have held themselves ready for too long and are only now beginning, very carefully, to let it down. "She knew," Holt said, "about Wren. When she handed that letter over, she knew what it would set in motion. Yes, 8 years old. 8 years old. Her mother was like that. Adeline could see 3 moves ahead." He paused. "She said she got enough detective work just being married to one." Della almost smiled. She was probably right. Almost certainly the fire was low. She didn't get up to add wood. Neither did he. "When this is over," Holt said. She looked at him. "I have been thinking about leaving," he said. Her hands went still, "Not the way it sounds. I think about it because it is what I do. When things get complicated, when things get valuable, I leave before I can lose them." "I know," she said quietly. "You know, I've watched you. For 3 weeks, I've watched a man who works like he's afraid to stop, who checks every door before he sleeps, who is very, very good at being ready to go." She looked at him steadily. "I know what someone who's been running looks like, Holt. I've had one living in my barn, and," he said, "and I'm not asking you to stay. It's not mine to ask. What if I wanted to be asked?" The fire popped. The horses shifted in the barn. Outside, the Montana night was vast and cold and completely indifferent to the conversation happening in this kitchen. "Then I'd say," Della said slowly, "that this land has enough room for a man who needs space and not enough patience for a man who hasn't decided." She met his eyes. "I'm 38 years old. I've buried a husband. I've held this ranch alone for 7 months. I don't have time for halfway." He looked at her. "I'm not halfway," he said. "Then, what are you?" He thought about the mountains. 2 years of them. The cold and the quiet. The way he'd told himself it was for Wren. The way it had been true, and also not the whole truth. He thought about a gate hinge that swung in the wind. About coffee already made before he came inside. About a woman burning a wanted notice over a kitchen sink without being asked. "I'm a man," he said, "who came down out of the mountains and knocked on a door. And hasn't wanted to knock on anyone else's since." Della looked at the fire. A long moment. "Drink your coffee," she said. "Yes, ma'am, Della. Yes, Della." She stood and put wood on the fire after all. Drummond did not run, because Drummond was a man who believed in what he'd built. Not just the land and the money. The idea of himself. The image he'd maintained for 30 years as a man of standing. Running was for men without that, and Silas Drummond had not yet accepted that he was now one of those men. He came to the ranch himself, the next morning, before 8. 2 men behind him, his last 2. He called out politely at the gate, his voice carrying across the yard, with the ease of a man who has spent a lifetime being listened to. Federal marshals were already moving. Estimated arrival: afternoon. They needed to hold the situation 6 more hours. Holt laid it out plainly at the gate. Federal Land Registry, witness statements, documentary evidence in 3 territories, testimony from one of Drummond's own men, and a letter, written by his wife. Before she died, she saw the man Drummond sent. She wrote down his name. She gave it to their 8-year-old daughter to carry until it reached the right person. Drummond went very still. Fallon from the doorway, badge visible. "Don't. I will arrest both of you right here, and I will enjoy it." Drummond turned back to Della. He looked at her, really looked. Not the assessing look she'd seen before. Something older, something from further back. "Warren was my friend," he said. "Once, a long time ago, I know," she said. "When he found the survey, I tried to make a fair offer. You tried to buy something my husband said wasn't for sale," she said. "And when he said no, you sent someone to take it." Her voice did not shake. "There is no version of that story where you are not responsible for what happened." He had nothing. For perhaps the first time in a very long time, Silas Drummond stood in front of something he could not talk through or buy through or outlast. He looked at his hands. He looked at the mountains. He looked at the gate of a ranch he had wanted and could not have. "I'll wait for them," he said. "The marshals." "Smart," Holt said. Drummond dismounted, sat down on a fence outside the gate, and waited. The federal marshals arrived at 2 in the afternoon. They took Drummond and his men. They took Voss from the barn. They took everything built piece by patient piece over 3 weeks. Doshel Aldous kept looking at the documentation like he was reading a textbook case. "This is very thorough," he said. 7 years with Pinkerton," Holt said. Drummond looked at the ranch one more time as they loaded him into the wagon. One long look. Then he looked away. 30 years of accumulation. 6 years of deliberate acquisition. All of it ending in a wagon on a Saturday afternoon. Della watched from the porch. Holt stood beside her. They watched until the sound of the wagon faded into the ordinary sounds of the afternoon. "I need to go somewhere," Della said. "I'll be back." She went to the grave. The afternoon was cold and clear. The sky the particular blue of October in Montana. The mountains enormous and permanent. "They got him," she said. "Drummond, he's in custody. All of them." A pause. "You tried to protect me by not telling me, which was very like you. And also very wrong, if you want my honest opinion." The wind moved through the timber. "There's someone on the ranch. You'd have liked him. He doesn't waste words. He sets fence posts until they're right, not just until they'll do." She paused. "He has a daughter. She named my rooster Governor. I'm not asking your permission. That's not what this is. You don't need to give me permission to keep living, Warren. You'd have hated that." She was quiet. "But I wanted to tell you, because you were my person for 11 years and you are in this ground, and this ground is mine, and all of that is still true. It doesn't go away. Go away. I don't want it to go away." She put her hand on the top of the marker. Cold stone. "Rough cut. I love you," she said. "I'm going to keep loving you. That's not something that has an end." She took her hand away. "But I think I'm done waiting for the rest of my life to start." She turned around. Holt was not there. She'd half expected him to follow. He hadn't. She walked back to the house alone. Which was exactly right. Nate Greer arrived on Monday. He was 50 years old, with a Pinkerton badge. And the kind of face that had been everywhere and remembered all of it. He dismounted at the gate and shook Holt's hand for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked at the ranch, at the new outbuilding, at the cattle, at Nobody the cat on the fence post, like a very small and opinionated landowner. "You look different," Nate said. "Like you stopped. You've been moving since Colorado. Right now you look like a man who's standing somewhere." Wren appeared from the henhouse with nobody under her arm and 3 eggs in a basket. and Governor the Rooster following behind her, with the dignified self-importance of a man who has accepted his role in public life and takes it seriously. Nate watched this. Then he looked at Holt. The rooster, he said. She named him. The cat. She organized that too. The cat looks satisfied, yes. She organizes things to everyone's satisfaction. She gets that from her mother. Nate was quiet a moment. Adeline would have loved this place. She would have had a system by Wednesday. Wren looked at Nate with those direct gray eyes. Then she looked at Holt. "Is he staying for supper?" she said. "Yes," Della said from the porch. "There's enough." Wren looked back at Nate. "You can sit in the good chair," she said, "but nobody sits there in the evenings. So you'll have to move." Nate looked at Holt. "I like her. Everyone does. It's a thing that happens." After supper, after Wren had gone to bed, Nate reached into his coat and put something on the table. A Pinkerton badge, worn at the edges, the kind that has lived through things. Agency wants you back. Full reinstatement. Based here. Montana work. Nothing that takes you further than a week's ride without your say-so. Holt looked at the badge. He did not touch it. The charges, he said, dropped. Completely. Your actions were determined to be in defense of your daughter. The brother's deposition contained material falsehoods. Nate paused. "You've been cleared, Holt. For 2 months. I was waiting to tell you in person." Holt was still. 2 months. He'd been a cleared man for 2 months. And for 2 months he'd been fixing fence posts and checking property lines and making coffee before anyone else was awake. He looked at the badge. He looked at Della. She was looking at the table, her hands around her cup, not telling him anything with her face, not pushing anything his direction, just present. Being where she was, the way she always was. He thought about the mountains. 2 years of quiet that he'd told himself was peace, and which had actually been the absence of something. The absence of a table, a fire. Coffee already made. A rooster with a title and a cat. With a territory, and a girl who spoke to graves, and had decided, with her complete and perfect 8-year-old judgment, that a woman she'd known for 3 weeks was safe enough to trust with everything. He thought about Della at the north corner of the house. Warren's rifle across her forearms, barrel down. Patient. Not waiting to be saved. Waiting to act. He picked up the badge, turned it over once, and handed it back to Nate. "No," he said. "Not this version of the work. I'm done chasing things across territories. I found something worth staying for." Nate was quiet. Then, the Pinkerton offer was official. Here's the unofficial one. There's a local magistrate position opening in Garrett County. Needs someone who understands investigation, without being ruled by whoever's paying for the law. Pays half what the agency would. But you'd go home every night. Della's hands were very still around her cup. "I'd need to think about it," Holt said. "Take your time." Nate stood. "The barn you're sleeping in, by the way." "Yes, it has 4 walls and a roof." "Yes. Is there a reason you're still in it?" Holt said nothing. Nate looked at Della. Della did not look up from her coffee. Nate put on his hat. "Good night," he said, with the tone of a man who has made his point. He went out. The kitchen was quiet. Just the fire. Just the sound of the house settling the way old houses settle in the cold. The creak of timber that has been in one place long enough to know itself. Della stood and took the cups to the basin. Stood there with her back to him. "The magistrate position," she said. "Yes, that's different from Pinkerton work. Very, you'd be here." "Yes," she turned around. "Holt, yes." "I have a question," he waited. "That first night, when you came to the gate. You said you knew something someone didn't want known. That you were being chased." She paused. "Was that the only reason you knocked on my door?" He looked at her. "The light," he said. She waited. "Your porch light. I was losing ground. I was cold, and Wren was colder, and I had 3 men behind me, and I needed a decision fast." He paused. There were 2 farms in range. One of them was dark. One of them had a light on. She looked at him. "I rode toward the light," he said. The fire. The settling house. That's a very simple reason, she said. Most real reasons are. She was quiet. He stood. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her with the particular deliberateness of a man who has been precise about everything in his life and intends to be precise about this. Della. Yes, I'd like to stop sleeping in the barn. She looked at him. Not surprised. Not performing, not surprise. Just looking, that's a statement, she said. Not a question, I know. You could have phrased it as a question. I could have. Why didn't you? Because I've been a question mark for 2 years. I'm tired of questions. I know what I want. I thought you deserved to hear it as a fact. She searched his face. He let her. He had nothing to hide in it. The magistrate position, she said. I'll take it. If you think it's a good idea, I think it's a very good idea. Then I'll take it. And the barn. I'd like to discuss the barn. You just did. I'd like to discuss it further. She looked at him. And then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Actually. Laughed. The real version. The one he'd only seen once or twice in 3 weeks, and which transformed her face entirely. Took 10 years off it. Made her look like the woman she was when nobody was testing her. Holt Granger. She said. Yes. You came down off a mountain. You slept in my barn for 3 weeks. You fixed every broken thing on this property. You built a federal case. You fought a professional killer in my yard. She was still smiling, shaking her head. And now you're standing in my kitchen at 11 at night, telling me you'd like to stop sleeping in the barn. Yes, like it's a business proposal. I didn't mean it to sound. It's fine. It's very you. Actually, is that a yes? Ask me properly. He looked at the ceiling for one moment, then at her. Would you consider letting me stay? Not in the barn, on this land, in this house. As whatever comes next after 3 weeks and a great deal of fence work. She looked at him, yes. She said, yes to which part? All of it. You impossible man, all of it? The storage room door opened. Wren stood in the hallway in her nightdress, Bertie under her arm. She looked at the two of them, standing in the kitchen at whatever hour this was. She looked at Holt. She looked at Della. She said very quietly, Mama Clara, just like that, no ceremony. Like it had always been true, Della went very still. Yes, she said. When she trusted her voice, Wren nodded once, satisfied, turned around, went back to bed. The door clicked shut. Holt and Della stood in the kitchen and did not speak for a long moment. She never misses anything, Holt said finally. No, Della said. She never does. 3 months later. Winter proper had come to Montana. Snow deep on the north pasture. Mountains white. The sky the particular gray that meant more was coming. Wren came in from outside, knocking snow off her boots and her voice. There's a man at the gate. Holt went to the window. Turned around with an expression Della had never seen before. Something young in it, something from very far back. That's Aldous, he said. He rode all the way from Cheyenne. It's about the case. Go. Let him in. I'll put coffee on. Wren appeared at Della's elbow. Did he do something good, she said. Papa? In the case, he did everything right. Della said, Mama used to say that about him. That he always did everything right. But it took him a while to do it for himself. This child. This particular child, with her mother's words still living in her. She was right, Della said. She usually was. Wren went to get another cup. Counted on her fingers, Della, Holt, Aldous, herself. Set them on the table with care. There'll be 4 of us. Is that enough coffee? I'll make more, Della said. Good. Wren sat down, put Bertie on the chair beside her. I told her about the trial. She was glad. What did she say? She said justice is slow, but it gets there. She said Mama always believed that. Wren straightened the doll's worn dress. She said most people were just waiting for someone to show them how. She looked up at Della. Is that true? Della thought about it honestly. She thought about Tom Briggs with his lumber on a wagon. Dorothy at the telegraph. Fallon riding through the gate with his decision already made. Wren on the porch in the dark, staying visible so they'd know where she was. A woman named Adeline, who had seen a dangerous man at her door and written down his name with whatever time she had left. "Yes," she said. "I think that's true." The front door opened, cold air, and two sets of boots on the porch. The ordinary sounds of people coming into a warm place from a cold one. Wren looked at the door. Then at Della. "Mama Clara," she said. And there it was. Just like that. No ceremony, like it was worth saying again. Like some things needed to be said more than once to be fully true. Della went very still. "Yes," she said, when she trusted her voice. "Are we still going to be all right?" Even now that it's over, Della looked at this child. Red-brown hair escaping every braid. Gray eyes, a worn cloth doll in the chair beside her, a cat asleep on the porch outside, a rooster with a title in the henhouse. A man coming through the door right now, cold-cheeked and alive in hers. "Yes," Della said. "We're going to be all right, how do you know?" "Because we already are." Wren decided that was a satisfactory answer. She turned to greet the men coming in from the cold that evening, after Aldous had given them the news. Guilty on all counts, Drummond sentenced to 20 years. Voss to 30, the properties to be dispersed, through proper legal channels to their rightful owners or their heirs. Federal circuit cases move faster than territorial ones when Washington decides they should. And Washington had decided. After the coffee and the talking and the accounting of all of it, they sat by the fire. Aldous had gone to the barn with the good blankets and Nobody the cat, who had apparently decided she liked federal marshals. Wren was asleep in the storage room, her room, with the pillow arranged exactly as it always was, with Birdie beside her, with the blue curtain on the window Della had made from the same bolt of cloth she kept finding uses for. The fire was low. Good low, not dying, just settled. Holt was in the chair by the window. Della was across from him. Between them the small table that had always been between those two chairs. The same table, the same chairs, the same fire, different. Everything the same and completely different. "Drummond will appeal," Holt said. "Let him. It could take years. Let it." He looked at her. "You're not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of very many things anymore. I've noticed that. In the last 3 months." She looked at the fire. I used to be afraid of the quiet. Of the house being too quiet. Now it's just a house. It's my house. And the quiet is mine too." "You're different," he said. "You say that like it's new information. I'm noticing it specifically tonight, because Aldous came, and I watched you hear the verdict, and I thought, she's going to cry. And you didn't. You just nodded, like you'd already made your peace with it before the outcome." "Confirmation," she said. "Yes, I made my peace at Warren's grave. A few months ago, I told him I was done waiting, the fire, the settling house. The Montana winter pressing at the windows, cold and permanent and beautiful. "I have a question," he said. She looked at him, the fence on the north pasture. "I think we should extend it another quarter-mile. The spring pasture grass was good this year, and if we're expanding the herd—" "Yes," she said. "You didn't let me finish. You were going to say it made sense to expand it before spring." "Yes, I know. I've been thinking the same thing since September. Why didn't you say? I was waiting to see if you'd get there yourself." He looked at her. "Did I take too long?" "No," she said. "You got there right on time." He smiled. Not the careful, controlled expression she'd seen in the first weeks. The real one. The one that was still a little surprised by itself. Like it had been stored somewhere and was only now finding its way back. "Della." "Yes, I'm glad I rode toward the light." She looked at him across the small table, across the fire. Across 3 months of mornings and evenings, and hard work and harder news and the slow, unremarkable, irreplaceable accumulation of a life, being built by two people who had decided, separately and then together, to stop running from the things that mattered. "So am I," she said, later, much later. When the fire was down to coals and the house was all the way quiet. Della stood at the kitchen window one more time. Same window, same yard. Different everything. The stars were out now. The clouds had broken, while they weren't watching. Cold and clear and enormous, the way October skies in Montana got when they meant to show off. The mountains were there again, dark and patient, against all that light. She looked at the barn. The light was off. For the first time in 3 months, the light in the barn was off because no one was sleeping in it. She looked at the yard, the gate that had been fixed, the fence posts that stood straight, the outbuilding with its new pale timber that would weather to match the rest of it by spring. She thought about the night a man had come, out of the dark with his hands up, and a child pressed against his back. She thought about Wren holding out a doll and saying a name in a voice, rough from months of disuse. She thought about Birdie, about what she'd been carrying, about how the most important things are sometimes the things that look the simplest, about how we carry things for each other without knowing we are doing it, about how we arrive at the right person at the right time, not because we planned it, but because we kept moving, kept going, kept the light on. She thought about all the things that travel with us, in coat pockets and desk drawers, in the back of bottom drawers where you put things when you're not ready to deal with them yet, in cloth dolls and in the shape of how we hold a coffee cup, in the way we stand on a porch and watch for the dark to come and refuse to stop watching. All the things we carry, all the things that carry us. She looked at the gate. She turned off the kitchen lantern. She went to bed. In the morning, there would be cattle to check and fences to ride, and coffee to make. There would be Wren with her inventory and nobody with her opinions, and the governor with his dignity intact. There would be accounts and acreage, and the ordinary, enormous work of a life on land you've chosen. There would be Holt. There would be, that was enough. That was everything. The stars held over the yard and the straight new fence posts and the pale new timber and the graves at the edge of the timber and the mountains behind all of it. Patient and permanent and not asking anything of anyone. And the ranch was quiet and the ranch was full, and that was how it ended and how it began. Both at once, the way the best things do. Skonridgia story about the families we carry toward each other, and the doors we keep lit for the ones still coming down the mountain. Extended notes. The year that followed the magistrate position in Garrett County turned out to be exactly what it was. The kind of work that suited a man who understood both the letter of the law and the spirit of the community it was meant to serve. Holt took the job in December, when the snow was already knee-deep, and the territory felt remote in the particular way of places that are far from everything when the weather turns serious. He rode into Garrison Creek 3 days a week. He handled disputes about property lines and water rights, and the occasionally contentious question of whose cattle had wandered where. He wrote up his reports in Warren's study, his study now, in the evenings after supper, while Della sat across from with her accounts and Wren did her reading lessons by the fire. It was ordinary. It was, Holt thought, the most extraordinary ordinary thing he had ever experienced. He had forgotten, or perhaps had never fully understood, what it meant to do the same thing twice, to sit in the same chair at the same table 2 nights in a row, to know when he rode out in the morning that he would be riding back to the same place in the evening. To have a place, the mountains were still there. He could see them from the window of the study. On clear days they looked close enough to touch, and on stormy days they disappeared, entirely into gray, and both ways were beautiful. But they didn't call to him anymore. That was the thing he noticed in the first weeks and then the first months. The pull he'd felt for 2 years, the pull that said, go higher, go quieter, go somewhere no one can reach you, had simply stopped. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just quietly, the way grief quiets eventually. Just steadily, the way a fire burns down to coals. He mentioned this to Nate Grier when Nate came back through in February, carrying the news of Drummond's appeal being denied and the final disposition of the seized properties. I used to feel it, Holt said. They were sitting on the porch, which was an act of stubbornness given the temperature. The pull to go back up, every morning. Like something in my chest that pointed north and up. And now, Nate said. Holt looked at the mountains. Now I just see mountains. Nate was quiet for a moment. Adeline would be glad, he said finally. She used to worry about that. About what would happen to you when? She used to worry. Holt sat with that. She knew? He said. She knew you. Nate stood, having apparently reached the limit of his tolerance for the cold. She always said the mountains were your way of grieving. That one day you'd be done grieving and you'd come down. She was a wise woman, Holt said. She was, Nate agreed. Almost as wise as the one inside, he went in for more coffee. Holt stayed on the porch a moment longer, looking at the mountains. Just mountains. Beautiful ones. But just mountains. He went inside. Wren started talking in full sentences sometime around January. Not all at once. The way things grew in her, slowly, deliberately, in the manner of someone who gave everything they did, the full weight of their attention. But the sentences came, and then the questions. And then, in a development that delighted Della, and sometimes alarmed Nobody the cat, the observations. Wren had a great many observations, about the chickens, primarily. She had expanded the naming system to include personality assessment, effectivity productivity assessments, which she reported to Della each morning, with the gravity of someone presenting findings at a formal meeting. Harriet is off laying again, she said one morning in February, settling onto a kitchen chair and accepting a cup of warm milk with the manner of someone who has earned it through difficult field work. Is she? Della said. It happens when it's cold. She doesn't like the cold. Margaret doesn't mind. But Harriet minds. Wren considered. Papa doesn't mind the cold either. He's been living in the mountains for 2 years, Della said. He's made his peace with it. He says the barn is colder than the house was. Wren looked at her over the rim of her cup. He says that a lot, does he? Every morning when he comes in? Wren was very careful to keep her expression neutral. But she was 8 years old and the effort was visible. He says, Della, that barn is considerably colder than this house. And then you say, yes it is. And he says, just noting it, and you say noted. And then he goes out to work. Della looked at her daughter. The word had arrived so quietly that she'd barely noticed it landing. How long has this been happening? Della said. Since November, Wren said. He's very consistent. Della turned back to the stove. Papa is very consistent, she agreed. Yes, Wren said. About most things. A pause. Mama Clara? Yes, I think he wants to stop sleeping in the barn. Della stood at the stove for a moment. I think you might be right, she said. So do I, Wren said, and returned to her observations about Harriet. The proposal, if you could call it that. Though Holt preferred to think of it as a logical extension of the conversation they'd been having for several months. Happened in March. It happened at the kitchen table, which was where most of the important conversations happened. It happened in the morning before the workday got started, which was when they both tended to say the things that needed saying. Holt put down his coffee cup. Della, he said. Yes. I've been sleeping in the barn for 5 months. Yes, the barn is cold. I know, it was cold in October. It was colder in November. It was very cold in December and January. He paused. February was indescribable. She looked at him. I'm aware of the temperatures. Holt? I thought perhaps there was a solution to the problem. A solution, she said, a formal one. Of the kind that would involve a circuit judge and some paperwork, and possibly a new dress for Wren, who has opinions about dresses. Della looked at the window. The March light was coming in at a low angle, the particular light of early spring that hadn't quite figured out yet whether it was allowed to be warm. Are you proposing? She said. I am indicating a strong interest in proposing, he said. I wanted to check the direction before committing. She looked at him. The direction, she said, is favorable. He picked up his coffee. "Good," he said. "That's it," she said. "That's the indication," he said. "The actual proposal will be more formal. When Wren has finished her breakfast. She's requested to be present." Della turned to look at the storage room door. It opened. Wren came out with Birdie under her arm, and the expression of someone who has been waiting at a door for approximately the right amount of time and has decided that this is it. "I'm done," she said. "You haven't had breakfast," Della said. "I'll have it after," Wren said, and came to stand beside Holt's chair with the air of someone fulfilling an official function. Holt stood. He was not a man who made speeches. He was not a man who reached for the elaborate. When the plane was available. But he stood up from the kitchen table in the morning light, and he said what needed saying, the way he always said what needed saying, directly, completely, without decoration. He said, "Delamarche. I rode toward the light on the worst night I'd had in 2 years, and I found something I hadn't been looking for, and I have been trying to be worthy of it ever since. I would like to keep trying, for as long as you'll have me on this land and in this house and in whatever comes next. Will you marry me?" Wren beside him nodded once, very seriously, the nod of an official witness confirming that the statement was accurate. Della looked at the two of them. "Yes," she said. Wren let out a breath. Then, very quietly, to Birdie, "I told you." They were married in May, when the valley was green and the mountains were still white at their peaks, and the air smelled like snowmelt and new grass. The circuit judge came. Tom Briggs and his family came, and the Hendersons, and Dorothy from the general store, who had been waiting for this development with the satisfaction of a woman who had contributed to it. Widow Fraser came and organized the reception with military precision. Wren wore a new dress that was the particular shade of blue she had decided was the right one. After an extremely thorough evaluation of several options, she carried Birdie and scattered wildflower petals with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has developed strong opinions about even coverage. Governor the Rooster attempted to attend but was redirected. Nate Greer came, riding down from the Capitol, where he'd been closing out the last of the Drummond case. He shook Holt's hand for a long time at the gate without saying anything, which was what he always did when something mattered. Dashiell Aldous came and stood in the back and looked quietly pleased. He short, as if this outcome had been one he'd been hoping for since November. Rook Fallon came. He'd lost his badge, voluntarily surrendered, as part of the testimony arrangement, but had found work with a small ranch operation to the west, honest work, the kind that let him look his daughter in the face. He stood to one side and watched and nodded at Holt when their eyes met, and Holt nodded back, and that was enough. It was a good day. The kind of good day that doesn't try to be more than what it is. A collection of people who care about each other, in a good place, in good weather, bearing witness to something they're all glad is happening. After, when the guests had gone and the evening had settled, and Wren was asleep, in her room with Birdie on the pillow, and the new blue curtain moving slightly in the May breeze, Holt and Della sat on the porch with their coffee. The same porch where she'd stood 7 months ago, with her coffee going cold, watching the dark come down off the ridgeline. The same coffee cups. The same mountains, different everything. You know, Holt said, the barn was genuinely very cold. I know, she said. I just want that on record. It's on record, she said. It was cold. It was cold. You survived. I survived because I'm very determined. You survived, she said, because you built something worth surviving for. He was quiet for a moment. The evening was warm. The first warm evening of the year, the kind that says, all right, it's time. The cold is done for a while. You can put it down now, Della, he said. Yes, I'm glad I stayed. She looked at the mountains. Dark against a sky that was holding the last of the light, the particular gold of a May evening in Montana, when the day is finally agreeing to be done. So am I, she said. And the ranch was quiet, and the ranch was full, and that was more than enough. That was everything. The valley in the years that followed the Ranchers Association that Tom Briggs had proposed. The idea that had first come together around a campfire and a shared fury at Drummond's methods became, over the following 2 years, one of the most effective cooperative arrangements of the territory. Holt drafted the founding agreement in Warren's study, on a cold February evening, with Della checking the language and Wren asleep in the next room, and Nobody the cat arranged on the documents as if reviewing them herself. It was simple, deliberately simple. Shared documentation of water rights, a common legal fund for disputes, an agreement to witness and record any incident that affected any member, fence cuttings, water blockages, intimidation. The pattern building that Drummond's methodology had exploited in reverse. Tom Briggs brought in the Hendersons and the Pragers, and 4 other families within the first month. By spring, they had 11 ranches. By the following winter, 17. It was not, Holt was careful to explain at every meeting, primarily a defensive arrangement. It was primarily a documentation system. The defense was a byproduct of the documentation. Hard luck doesn't follow property lines. Neither did honest organization. Drummond's empire unwound slowly, the way large things built on bad foundations tend to. The properties seized in the investigation were adjudicated over the course of 18 months. Some went to heirs of previous owners, who had sold under duress. Some went to auction at fair prices. 2 of them, the parcels to the immediate north of the Marsh property, went to families who had been waiting years for the chance to start fresh somewhere good. The water rights to the spring under the east pasture were formally documented and registered in the name of Della Granger, formerly Marsh, who was described in the registration paperwork as rancher and water rights holder, with no further elaboration required. She filed the paperwork herself in town on a Tuesday morning in November, the 2nd November, since Holt had come down from the mountain. She stood at the counter at the land registry office and signed her name where indicated and walked back out into the November air. She stood on the boardwalk for a moment. She thought about Warren. About the note in the back of the bottom drawer, the careful squared-up script, the name written below. About what it had cost him to know what he knew and to try to protect her from it. She thought about the spring running under the east pasture. Invisible, underground, patient, running through the valley year-round, drought or flood, asking nothing and giving everything, the thing that had started all of this. She got on her horse and rode home. Holt was fixing the north fence when she arrived. He saw her face as she came through the gate. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. He nodded, went back to the fence. She rode to the barn. Some things didn't need more than that. The spring itself became something of a landmark in the valley. Not a monument, nothing so formal, just a place people knew about. A place that had, in the space of one eventful autumn, gone from being a secret worth killing for to being a documented resource belonging to a specific family, a fact of law and public record. Holt took Wren to see it one afternoon in April, when the snowmelt was running and the ground was wet and soft. The spring didn't look like much from the surface. A slight depression in the east pasture where the grass grew particularly green and the cattle preferred to graze. The geological survey markers were still there, small iron stakes Warren had placed when the surveyors came. Unobtrusive. Easy to miss. "This is what all of it was about?" Wren said. "This is where the water comes from," Holt said. "Underground. It runs under this whole pasture and feeds into the creek. A dry year, you can lose the creek completely, and this spring keeps running." Wren considered the depression in the earth. "It doesn't look like much," she said. "No, it doesn't, but it is. Yes," she thought about that. Mama Adeline, she used to say that about things. That the most important things were usually the most ordinary-looking ones. Holt crouched down and put his hand on one of the iron survey stakes. She was right, he said. She was usually right, Wren said. She was right about you too. He looked at his daughter. What did she say about me? Wren's face did the thing it sometimes did. The careful thing. The thing where she was deciding how much to say, and in what order. She said you were the kind of man who would do the right thing, Wren said finally. But that sometimes you'd have to lose everything first before you'd believe that what you had was worth doing the right thing for. Holt sat with that for a moment. The spring was running somewhere beneath them, silent and continuous, doing what springs do. She was right, he said. I know, Wren said. That's why I kept Bertie safe. Governor the Rooster, it turned out, had significant diplomatic skills. This discovery came about through a series of events that began when the Hendersons' rooster, an ill-tempered creature named nothing in particular, because nobody could get close enough to him to name him, escaped from his enclosure and found his way to the Granger property. This should have been a disaster. 2 roosters in one yard typically ended in conflict and blood, and the involvement of at least 3 adults trying to intervene. Instead, Governor walked to within 6 feet of the intruder, regarded him steadily for approximately 30 seconds, and then led him calmly to the section of fence nearest Henderson's property, and waited. The Henderson rooster, apparently understanding that something was expected of him, went home. Wren observed this entire exchange from the henhouse doorway, with the expression of someone whose prior assessment has been confirmed. I told you, she said to Nobody the cat, who was also observing. Nobody indicated, through posture, that she was reserving judgment. He has authority, Wren said. You can see it. Nobody continued to reserve judgment. She was a cat. It was her prerogative. But she did, subsequently, begin sitting closer to the governor than she had previously, which Wren noted in her records as a significant development. The Pinkerton agency sent another letter in June, the 2nd June. This one was addressed formally to Holt Granger-esque, Magistrate, Garrett County, Montana Territory, and it came not from Nate Greer but from the regional director. It acknowledged his work on the Drummond case with rather fulsome praise, and it extended what it called a standing invitation to rejoin the agency in any investigative capacity he chose. He read it at the breakfast table. Wren was cataloging the morning egg count. Della was reviewing the summer grazing plan. Another one? Della said, without looking up. They're persistent, he said. What will you tell them? He folded the letter. Thank you for the invitation and the compliment on my work, he said. I am currently satisfied in my position and not looking to make a change. Della looked up. That's very diplomatic, she said. I've been working on it. It sounds like something a magistrate would say. I am a magistrate, he said. You are, she agreed and looked back at the grazing plan. Wren, without looking up from the egg count, said, You should tell them you have a fence to fix. Holt looked at his daughter. That's also an option, he said. It's true, she said. The south section. You were going to do it last week and then it rained. It did rain, so now you have to do it this week. She recorded a number in her ledger. The Pinkerton people can wait, Holt refolded the letter. They can, he agreed. He went out to fix the south fence. Nate Greer came through in August. His last visit, he said, before he retired from Pinkerton and moved to California where he had been given to understand the winters were less philosophically challenging. He sat on the porch with Holt and Della in the August evening, and they talked about the case and the territory and the things that had changed in the valley since Drummond's fall, which were many and generally good. After a while, Nate was quiet for a moment. I've been doing this work for 22 years, he said. The investigative work, finding things, documenting things, making cases and, Holt said, and I've seen a lot of cases. Nate looked at the mountains, going purple in the evening light. Some of them come out right. Most of them, actually. The law works more often than people think it does. When you give it the right tools, he paused. But I've never seen one come out right quite like this one. Like what? Della said. Nate looked at her. This complete, he said. Usually there's something left. Something that didn't resolve. Somebody who didn't get what they should have gotten. Or somebody who got away with something they shouldn't have. The law is imprecise. Justice is imprecise, he paused. But in this case, he stopped. In this case, Della said. In this case, Nate said, everyone who should be in prison is in prison. Everyone who should be free is free. And he looked at the porch, the yard, the barn, the mountains. And the people who should be here are here. Holt looked at his wife. Della looked at Nate. That's a very generous assessment, she said. It's an accurate one, Nate said. From inside the house came the sound of Wren's voice, carrying on some private conference with Birdie about the day's events. The particular cadence of it, the questions and the pauses and the responses that only Wren heard, was so familiar by now that neither of them registered it as unusual. Nate, who had been hearing it all evening for the first time, smiled at the sound. She's going to be something, he said. She already is, Holt said. Yes, Nate agreed. I meant when she's older. She's going to be something then too, Della said. They sat on the porch until the stars came out, and Nobody the cat came to arrange herself on the railing in her preferred spot, and the August night got its full dark on, and the mountains disappeared into it. Good. Holt thought, just mountains, now that you could see them again. Beautiful ones, patient and permanent and not asking anything of anyone. He was glad to be on this side of them. A knot on Birdie lived on the pillow in Wren's room for many years. The seam in her back was re-sewn, properly this time, with good strong thread, in the spring following the events of that October, when Wren decided it was time. She did the sewing herself, with Della guiding her hands, in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. She's been carrying things long enough, Wren said, when they were done. She has, Della agreed. Now she can just be a doll. Yes. Wren held Birdie up and looked at her. The worn face, the faded color, the particular softness of something that has been loved for a very long time. Mama would be glad, Wren said. Della looked at the doll. She would, she said. Wren put Birdie back on the pillow with the careful attention she brought to all placement decisions. Then she looked at Della. Mama Clara. She said, yes, thank you for letting me keep her. Della looked at this child. This particular child who had carried something important across 2 years and 1,000 miles, and known exactly where to put it down. Thank you, Della said, for carrying her. Wren nodded. That was settled. She went to see what state the governor was in. What Wren learned and what she knew the things learned in the year that followed the October event were many and varied, because Wren was the kind of child who considered everything an opportunity to understand something she didn't understand yet. She learned to bake bread. This took 3 weeks and resulted in 1 loaf that could have been used as a doorstop, 2 that were acceptable, and 1 that was genuinely good. She ate the good one standing at the counter while it was still warm, with butter, and reported that it was worth all the doorstops. She learned to mend a cinch strap. This was Holt's doing, and he approached it with a particular thoroughness of a man who understood exactly what a broken cinch strap could mean. He taught her what a proper strap looked like, and what a compromised one looked like, and how to tell the difference. She paid close attention. She was 8 years old going on, 9 going on 35, and she understood that some kinds of knowledge were not academic. She learned the names and locations of the survey markers on the east pasture. She developed a system for checking them regularly, which she recorded in a small notebook that became, over time, a running account of the spring, the water table through the seasons, the health of the grass in the dependent areas, the behavior of the creek in the lower pasture relative to the spring's output. Nobody had asked her to do this. She had noticed that it needed doing and had done it. She got that from her mother. The organizing. The understanding that things needed documenting before they could be properly managed. She got something else from Holt. The patience. The willingness to gather information slowly and carefully and not act until the picture was complete. The understanding that moving too fast made the picture blurry. And from Della she got something she didn't have a name for exactly. Something to do with staying. With standing still when staying was the right thing. With not leaving just because leaving was available. With building instead of running. She got that from watching Della every morning for a year, standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, looking at the same yard and the same mountains and the same gate she'd been looking at for 11 years, and then for 7 months alone, and then for another year and more, with people in it. Same window, different everything. Wren understood at 8 going on 9 going on 35 that this was a kind of knowledge the mountains couldn't give you, that you had to be in one place long enough to learn it. She intended to be in one place long enough. She was already home. Bertie continued to sit on the pillow in Wren's room. On nights when the wind came off the mountains like it had a personal grudge. October wind, the kind that found the gap between your collar and your neck and stayed. Wren would lie in her bed in the room that smelled of dried apples and blue curtain fabric and listen to the sounds of the house. The sounds were never entirely her own. There was always someone else's sound in the house. Holt in the study, or Della in the kitchen, or nobody on the porch or the governor making his pre-dawn announcements. There was always company in the sounds. On those nights, Wren would sometimes hold Bertie and tell her about the day. She didn't think her mother could hear. She knew that the dead couldn't hear. She was 9 years old, and not inclined to believe things that weren't true. But she said things out loud to Bertie, anyway, because saying things out loud was how you understood what you actually thought about them. Her mother had taught her that back when she talked to the doll the first time, in the room above the store in Colorado, in the life that had preceded everything. Say it out loud, her mother had said. You'll understand it better. She was right. She was usually right. So Wren would hold Bertie on the October nights and say things out loud about the ranch and the chickens and what she'd learned that day and whether she'd improved at bread baking and what the spring survey markers showed and what it had been like to watch Holt and Della talk across the dinner table that evening in the shorthand of people who know each other well. She would say, I think we're going to be all right. She had been saying this for over a year now. She was still saying it because she'd learned. From her father, from Della, from a small cloth doll that had carried something important across 2 years and 1,000 miles. That some things needed to be said more than once to be fully true. She would say it again tomorrow, and the day after, because it was true, because they already were.